is Representative Tracy Hurd.
No, Representative Williams.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I told Representative White to change it up. But, many of my comments have already been stated today, so I'm not going to repeat those. I will stand up here and for the record say that the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus is completely opposed to House Bill 159. As you all have heard, African Americans will be significantly disenfranchised by this bill. We know that 887,000 Ohioans don't have a valid state government ID. We also know that African Americans, as they say, 25% don't have an ID. We know the cost associated with getting a state ID is tremendous, and the price is increasing every day, and it might increase more as we go through this budget. We also know that we have problems right now with provisional ballots. This bill simply just adds to the barriers that are in place right now to prevent African Americans from voting. When you have a bill or a law that states that if you're not at the right table, then that vote does not count. That's a problem. When you tell me that there's not a problem with impersonation at the polls, but yet you want me to show you a valid state ID as opposed to any other ID, that's a significant problem. Right now, I believe they are targeting African Americans in this state. I believe it's unfair, and I believe it's time that the voters of Ohio stand up and do something about it. Again, we're opposed to the bill.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm State Representative Tracy Maxwell Hurd. And it's yet another sad day in Ohio and the diminishing greatness of the state as we further wreak havoc on our citizens. Certainly at least the poor, working poor, middle class, elderly, and our minorities. It's already been decided in this country that voting is a free right bestowed upon its citizens. Apparently that is under reconsideration. What we classified and outlawed as a poll tax has been resurrected. If the state were providing free identification for those challenged by acquiring this, I might be able to find a way to support it. But as it stands, a free ID is provided only for the indigent. By what criteria does one establish indigence? The bill does not clarify. Further, what is projected as a nominal expense in our fiscal report has already cost Indiana $10 million. Hardly nominal in the midst of a recession. Citizens of this state are being systematically erased from access, participation, and in a few more steps, existence. We eliminate the ability to bargain for one's pay and benefits, we slash education, we challenge healthcare reform, we eliminate compensatory time, we go after pensions, and now we attempt to go back to steal the right of the people to even be able to impact the very process that is robbing them of their ability to survive in this state. There's much conversation and to great length on the fear of losing our seniors to other states, our fear of losing our students to other states, our fear of losing our businesses to other states. There seems to be no fear or care for the possibility of losing our middle class. There indeed exists a tipping point for residents of this state where it is too great a challenge to remain. It was suggested in committee by Chairman Mecklenburg this was only the beginning of this General Assembly's approach to election reform, and that all would be heard, though more appropriately considered under upcoming legislation. We heard testimony from the only two other states who have this legislation, but our Secretary of State, though just outside on the very steps of this building, could not find time to come in and address this very important subject. Last General Assembly, I had the privilege of working with people around the state, across the aisle in both chambers, to try to come to some consensus on what election reform should look like in this state. We came that close to getting it done, but even though we weren't successful, there's a list of items that we did come to agreement on. None of those are currently being considered in the pending legislation. So how can we have any expectation of genuine consideration or inclusion of our concerns and our issues when the initial introduction of the subject results in efforts to silence potentially up to almost 1 million of our citizens? Should I simply find it ironic that the populations most impacted by this legislation have Democratic leanings? One of my Republican colleagues challenged us yesterday to have the courage to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. I return the challenge, and this is an easy one. Let the citizens of this state know their rights are valued. Do the right thing. Let there be no resurrection of exclusion in Ohio. Make it clear voters' rights are secure, and defeat this poll tax today on the floor of the House of Representatives, just as it was defeated in 1966. Thank you. I'd now like to bring forward Peg Rosenfield of the League of Women Voters.
As I said in my testimony yesterday, if you talk about voting fraud as a massive problem and you say it over and over in a loud voice, eventually a lot of people will believe it, but it doesn't make it true. And I pointed out I was particularly personally worried about this bill. When my mother lived here, this bill would have disenfranchised her. And I take great issue with that. This is an unfair bill and we oppose it. Thank you.
Now I introduce Representative Ramos.
Thank you. Good morning, my name is Dan Ramos, and I'm the state representative in the 56th district from the city of Lorain and in Lorain County. I'm here today to speak against House Bill 159, which creates undue burdens on the citizens trying to exercise their rights to vote. This bill creates barriers for Ohio citizens, and all parties to this bill are well aware that those barriers would impact working class and minority communities disproportionately, such as those that are in my district. In my district alone, this will negatively affect thousands of working people struggling to get by, impoverished people who've fallen on hard times, students and the elderly, all of which are less likely to own vehicles, need a driver's license, or have reasonable access to the BMV. The BMV is a private entity, and that's one that is not necessarily accessible by bus routes, since its primary purpose is to serve those who drive a car. This is especially true in light of likely cuts to public transportation services through the cuts to the local government fund, which have been proposed by Governor Kasich. This is also especially true in both very rural areas and in the inner city. Now, it's long been a policy of this state to provide polling locations throughout our neighborhoods to ensure that all Ohioans have a reasonable opportunity to vote. Although in recent years, many of these polling places have been consolidated in order to save dollars. What used to be a neighborhood polling place is now a polling place for the entire side of town, or for the whole village or a whole township. We're already causing some burden to folks who have issues with mobility. By adding the requirement to purchase an ID from a private entity, as well as the expense and effort in attaining one, serves as a hindrance to their participation in our elections, and it is, in practice, a poll tax. It will create anomalies in our election results and take away the most fundamental rights which we have, the right to vote, from some of our most vulnerable citizens who deserve to have their voices heard.